Consciousness is mirror symmetry. I will identify three kinds of symmetry with three kinds of awareness. This will make for a bridge between philosophy, metaphysics, consciousness studies, psychology on the one side, and mathematics and physics on the other side, thanks to quantum symmetries, Bott periodicity, the tenfold way in condensed matter physics. I am Andrius Kulikauskas. This is Math for Wisdom. And I am presenting a paper that I wrote. It's basically a draft for now. It's called An Allegory of the Solipsistic Self, the Hamiltonian of a Non-Interacting Fermion. And so this is the outcome of years of research into Bott periodicity as a mathematics for modeling the metaphysics of the divisions of everything and three minds. And this is metaphysical, conceptual, cognitive frameworks that I've documented for modeling human experience, how I understand my life and I imagine your life. So I'll talk about that system and I'll relate it to this diagram ultimately, which is the purpose of the paper. And so I'll be talking about three minds, a mind that unconsciously knows answers, a mind that doesn't know, thus consciously asks questions, and a third mind that balances the two, and that's full-fledged consciousness. It's the investigatory mind. It's the deliberate, willful, cognizant mind. And I'll relate those ultimately to three quantum symmetries. So in the quantum physics of a fermion, which could be an electron, which is all by itself and has a relationship with itself. It turns out that that's quite sophisticated. That can be subject to various symmetries, and there's combinations of those symmetries, 10 in all. So they make for an 8 cycle, which is given by real Bott periodicity, and a 2 cycle, which is given by complex Bott periodicity. And the symmetries are their time reversal, their charge conjugation, and their parity, also known as chirality, also known as sublattice symmetry. That's the one that I'm saying is full-fledged consciousness, because it's going to be matching up the other two. And so maybe I'll take the opportunity to explain what these symmetries are. In quantum physics, or in physics in general, you can have translation symmetries, rotation symmetries. The universe shouldn't have different behavior if we change the coordinate system, right? So in general. But, and so that gives rise to different various conservation laws because of Noether's theorem. But more recently, in the 20th century, it was realized with quantum physics that there are these very basic symmetries. So one would be the mirror symmetry, which basically, imagine if we had the same universe, but in a mirror. So you could take, and what a mirror does, let's say it reflects one axis, facing the mirror, it turns it around. So I'm looking at the mirror is looking at me. Now, should this change the laws of the universe, right? And in a certain sense, you would think not. It turns out, though, that in some very peculiar cases, I think like with the weak force, it actually does, that there's particles, antiparticles that are sensitive in certain conditions, I think, like maybe under decay, because particles can be oriented in a left-handed way or in a right-handed way. I guess I imagine, like, let's say, with regard to their spin. So that's metaphysically significant if you think about something like the learning cycle. So um, central to my metaphysics is this three cycle for participation or learning, where you take a stand, you follow through, you reflect, you take a stand, you follow through, you reflect. It's the scientific method of having a hypothesis, doing the experiment, looking at the results, keeping the same hypothesis or correcting it, and continuing. Well, so imagine if I'm looking at the mirror, right? And I'm going from my hypothesis to the experiment, but my mirrored self is going in the opposite direction from the experiment to the hypothesis. I'm learning, and it's almost like they're unlearning, right? So imagine if that was the same. Learning and learning, what's the difference? You're going around a three cycle. So then the whole three cycle becomes, the whole learning becomes kind of pointless. Now, there's a subtlety here when we think, and very important, and I'm still just, I guess, appreciating this. If you're looking at this, quote unquote, objectively, as if you were looking at me and my mirror alter ego together, well, then you have some kind of common space in mind, right? Some greater space in mind. And so we're going in opposite directions. But if you think of me and my mirror self as any old individual, as kind of like equivalent individuals, well, then from our point of view, we're both going around the three cycle in the same direction. So, what that's basically saying is that I would think that we both can be learning, but we're not learning personally in a way that would make sense in some kind of objective universe that's looking at us as some kind of unique, specific individual. No, we're experiencing life as if we were a person in general, a common being. And so when we look at these fermions, these electrons, and we're modeling what it's like for them to be all by themselves and have a relationship with themselves, that kind of thing becomes important. Is it basically like one fermion, one electron in all these different situations? And so they're all, let's say, doing the three cycle in unison in the same direction. Or are they to be imagined as all different beings with their own different personalities, and so they're going in opposite directions, so to speak. So is that learning cycle defined internally, or is it defined in terms of some kind of common external space and time, right? And so what this is saying is that if you want, learning in that sense would require that we would be beings if that type of symmetry exists. So this is very metaphysical. And the other two symmetries are likewise very metaphysical. One is charge conjugation. And basically that means if you have a positron, so a positron would be the antimatter version of an electron, and basically it has the opposite charge, has the same mass, has the opposite charge, and you typically is understood as going in the opposite direction in time. So imagine if you have a positron, this positive charge. Now compare that with a hole in an electron sea. So I think Dirac would talk about but you don't have to be Dirac. You can just say, look, let's say you have a metal and you have all these electrons that are filled up with the metal, but there's one missing electron. It's a hole. Okay, and it can move around. It's for all practical purposes, it's kind of functioning like a particle, except that it has, and so it has the opposite charge. The hole will have a positive charge as opposed, and it will repel other positive charges. So that's how it'll look like, let's say. So in many ways, it's not clear if it's any different than a positive particle. Now, it won't have mass, so maybe that's not the best example, but I think you can kind of imagine the point. And the point is, is a particle and a whole, can they be the same thing? Right? And so, like, if you're replacing matter with antimatter, like if you switched all the matter around with the antimatter, that's what charge conjugation does. But it leads to that kind of philosophical question, like if something is, and you compare that with a whole, well, a whole says something is not. But for something to not be, can that be equivalent to being? So, in a certain sense, charge conjugation, I think that would say yes. Well, then existence kind of doesn't make sense anymore, because if the not being and being are the same, right? There's not a distinction, right? So that's a metaphysical thing to that's indicated by this symmetry. And another one is time reversal. So time reversal says if you looked at the forward motion of time and you said, no, let's turn time around so it's flowing backwards, right? So it's like you're reversing the movie. Well, that's maybe awkward to talk about. So another way that they would talk about is to say, let's just switch all the momentums around. Okay, so instead of it moving forward, let's say everything that's moving forward is now going to move backward with the opposite velocity. Okay. Well, and so in cases like planetary motion, I mean, it seems it's just you can't really tell. I mean, the laws of gravitation and things like that seem to be happy in either direction. Now, when you deal with thermodynamical processes, or if you have like irreversible things, because let's say maybe two things lead to the same state, but they won't diverge going backwards. So that's why you have all these issues with entropy and non-reversibility of, spilling a can of ash or breaking a glass of water. So in that kind of situation, the levels of knowledge, whether, what, how, why, which I'm saying are the four levels of knowledge, well, how then just doesn't make sense anymore, right? The whole causal direction just doesn't make sense if you go either way. So there's a way to think of it to say like, well, if you have time reversal, it's kind of like you're saying you don't have knowledge. Okay, there's knowledge just doesn't make sense. So that can all be disputed, but I think what I'm trying to say is that when I realized that Bott periodicity relates to these quantum symmetries, I delved into these quantum symmetries. I need to understand them better, but you'll see I did a lot to try to understand them, and then that led me to make this bridge that I'll tell you about. So, and then what my goal is to get to this point. And what this basically will say, and I'm showing this. You'll see the metaphysical structures here, which I started thinking about when I was a freshman at 17 years old in 1982 at the University of Chicago. And I wanted to know everything, and I wanted to start by knowing something, but something that would be absolutely true. And back then, nobody believed that you could get any absolute truth. You were encouraged to ask big questions, but you were not encouraged to believe that you could ever get big answers. And so I just grew up as a child wanting to know everything and apply that usefully. So I was had a different intention, and I just said, well, the way to do this, you can define complicated things in terms of simple things, but how do you define the simplest things? They have to be defined in terms of each other. Like this three cycle of taking a stand, following through, reflecting. So if you want to talk about being and doing and thinking, defining those individually is just not going to make sense. But if you can define those three with regard to each other, if you can say, hey, these are actually modes that are referencing this deeper structure. And so it turned out that there were these 8 divisions of everything, and I'll come back to them. And the work in my paper is to align that with Bott periodicity, which aligns very exactly with this classification of these combinations of symmetries. So to talk about these symmetries, and there's CT, I wrote S here for sublattice symmetry, but it's parity would be the more common in physics. So it's a CPT. Now, the parity, this S is going to be the consciousness. And the consciousness is going to, like the investigatory mind, is going to combine the answering mind and the questioning mind. So it's going to combine these other two. And so what I'll be showing is that the time reversible, it's going to be related to like what's accessible, and charge conjugation will be like what's inaccessible. Like, so those holes are basically telling you something's inaccessible, but being able to go backward and forward is going to be saying something's accessible. And if you have combination of both of those, then something is defined absolutely. So this circle will be about modeling the self from understood relatively, understood in terms of personality, understood as something that can have a personal perspective which they can step into or step out of. You know, you step into, you're immersed, you're in your vivid emotional life. You know, you can't see anything outside yourself. You're living intensely, uh, completely, whatever you're doing. But then you can step back and look around and kind of see, size things up, and you kind of like removing from yourself a bit. So this ability to step in and step out, we'll see that that will nicely match up with a Hamiltonian being mapped to its conjugate and then back. That's how this mapping will work. Another thing is that, and this is another way that the conscious and unconscious will come up, is that if they square to +1 or they square to -1, those are the two options for these symmetries. So I'll be saying, well, look, if you square to +1, then you're in a 2 cycle, and that'll be like a being and the organism. I'm sorry, a being and its environment. So like, or an organism and its environment, they go back and forth. That's a 2 cycle. But if it squares to -1, it's part of a 4 cycle. And so then you get an action perception loop where action and perception can be monitored. And so that introduces consciousness. Okay, so that you can say, hey, this is a perception that's coming from the environment, coming to me, let's say the organism, and now I'm going to take an action. That action is going to go out. So you have these little ability to monitor these extra states. So you have a 4 cycle. So squaring to -1 means you have something like I squared equals -1, and then -1 squared gives you +1, and so you have, +1 I -1 minus I +1. There's 4. That's a 4 cycle. So I'm just warming you up, but that's the kind of thing we'll be thinking about. And then the crucial thing is that, so these symmetries, either you have one of them, like either you have C by itself or T by itself. So you can kind of see there's these two axes here. Or you can have a combination, in which case you have the third, because they're multiplied together. So basically, S is related to the product of C and T. And so S is what's defined absolutely, but that can stand on its own and be compared to what's undefined. So undefined means there's no symmetry. It's just, which would be kind of weird for physical processes. But that's something imagined. And so that total lack of symmetry, metaphysically, it's like God. Okay, so it's one way to kind of be thinking. God is the undefined. Okay, but this world, this kind of like godly domain, is where the being is defined absolutely, not as a personality, not as like a separate electron with its own little hang-ups and its own little, coordinate system that's defined relative to itself. No, it's defined as that universal electron that can live in any circumstance. It's that common being, like the Jesus electron, right? So, or the Buddha electron, right? So then if you're like that bodhisattva, maybe, then you can let go of all your prejudices and you can let go of all your preconceptions and you can be here. You don't need these other two symmetries. You can be by yourself and you can let go of yourself and then come back. And, like Jesus says, I lay down my life and I pick it back up again. And he goes, I'm not of this world. He's from beyond the world, but he can go into this world. And then in this world, you can link up your conscious mind and your unconscious mind and kind of like two brain hemispheres. You can pair them up. And then when you do that, then you'll be in one of these 4 corner states, and then you can let go and you can enter this divine realm. So that's quite fantastic. But the point is that this is an allegory or an analogy or a metaphor that seems to hang quite well. And it started as a metaphysical project, but I wanted to show that, hey, this metaphysics, people don't like to think metaphysically. So what can I do? It's very difficult to think this way. And so I needed to, and I do need to reach out to people and I go, oh, if I could show that these things appear in mathematics, well, people are willing to look at math as an absolute truth. Well, in practice they do. Maybe in theory they wonder, but in practice, math is given that type of status that if it's true, it's true, and it's true. So to kind of show that there's a way to read math, and not so much the math itself, but the practice, the thinking, the mathematical thinking is giving this. I'll also show that this very much relates to issues in quantum foundations, but particularly the measurement problem. So the three minds is an answering mind, a questioning mind, investigating mind, and I'll point to the theory translator. I've collected like 275 examples where that comes up in the history of world culture. But one very nice example is quantum physics, where you have states, you have observables, you have measurements. So states are the answers, observables are the questions, measurements link up the observables and the states, and those are your investigations. So you can imagine that you have this world and these symmetries that I'm saying that time reversal is the symmetry for having a state. And charge conjugation is the symmetry for having a observable. So you can imagine like matter and antimatter, it's kind of like linking, answers with questions, or states with observables, or particles with their wholes. You see, you have this kind of pairing going on. And so uh, and then now if you combine them into a measurement, then you can have a measurement. So, but then the measurement can stand by itself. It doesn't need that state or that observable. So that would be saying that this divine realm is like the classical world, and that's the collapse of the wave function. If you let go of all your prejudices and preconceptions, if you let go of all your states and all your observables, you say, look, why do I need observables? Why do I need states? I just want the measurement, right? Like, so then you can live in this world. Whereas if you want to have a wave function, if you have your personal hang up, to say, I need to have my own little system or subsystem and I need to define it with my personal wave function. Okay, you have your personal wave function, but that's all about you, right? Like so then you'll be trapped in this little world. But if you want to let go of your wave function and go over this world, well, then you need to take a measurement. You need to let go of your the answers, the states, and the observables. And see, like physics, where do they pull these states and observables from? They don't define them, right? So you got to grant this theory, at least it's talking about where they could be coming from, and it's, giving the beginnings of ways to look for experimental evidence saying, hey, like, well, check out these symmetries. So here's my paper. And it's called An Allegory, the Solipsistic Self as the Hamiltonian of a Non-Interacting Fermion. It's kind of very technical sounding. And so I submitted this for the Artificial General Intelligence Conference. And that's a nice conference in the sense that you could write a 10-page paper. And then if you are accepted, you can give a talk in Iceland. So I thought, well, I'd like to go to Iceland. But of course, what I thought was, well, I would like someone to, I'd like to share my work. I worked so hard on this. I hadn't gotten these results yet, by the way, that I'm going to tell you. But it was certainly a motivation to work on that, and I was grateful for that. And the deadline was April 12th. And so I was just thinking, well, this is just work in progress. You may have seen my earlier videos, but I thought it's worth reporting, just this idea about Bott periodicity. I really hadn't thought through the quantum symmetries, although I had been working more and more on that. And so I pushed as much as I could, though, to get more research done. And then they set forward the deadline 1 month to May 12th. And I go, oh, I'm going to work on this very hard. I worked very intensely, and I'll talk about two papers that have taken me many months to understand the parts that I do. But they gave recipes for different aspects of this. One is related to these divisions of everything because they basically tell you how you can use linear complex structures to carve up Lie algebras. And so that's basically going to be like carving up mental space in the way that divisions of everything do. So it models that. That's a recipe by Stone, Chu, and Roy. And then there is another paper that talks about how to build up Hamiltonians in terms of their quantum symmetries. And that is by Indian researchers. The lead authors were, I think, students of Shenoy, so I'll have to look up their names. That and both of these papers were nice because they gave very clear recipes that even I could figure out mathematically how to. I mean, but it took a long time to figure that out. But they inspired this notion. The second one inspired this notion of an absolute frame versus a relative frame, like that it turns out that in order to understand how to calculate these Hamiltonians, you have to pick different bases when you do different combinations if you want to get nice answers. So this idea that like, if you want to do charge conjugation as a symmetry by itself, you'll use one basis. But that very same symmetry, if you combine it with time reversal, which means you'll also have this sublattice symmetry, you change your basis. And so you change from a relative basis, I would call it, to an absolute basis. And so that comes up in the math, this notion between like, well, what's just a relative, like a personal basis that's personal to your personality, as opposed to an absolute basis that would be like make sense for everybody, like whoever you would be. So that these things are very fascinating for me. Uh, so I'm gonna go through this paper, and I'm going to read parts of it and just kind of skip through parts of it and add insights so that this could be more understandable for you. I'll just say my paper was rejected, and there were 4 reviews, and it's very nice that they shared them. And they ranged from strong reject, and then a reject, and then like a neutral, and then a weak accept. And basically, I think the comments had not so much to do with my paper, nothing like no one complained about the math or etc. One person complained, the stronger complained about the physics, saying that you can't do this with physics, what I'm doing. These physics means very specific things, and you can't do this. So, and they also said that they did not think this was scientifically rigorous, and so it would make the whole thing look bad. They shouldn't be included. They also said that, we want papers with results. We basically want engineering. We want AGI to be thought of as the same as AI, that this is a part of AGI, is just as serious as the rest of AI. We're not crazy people. Um, and I think like, trillions of dollars are going into AI. This is the 18th conference in AGI, which in a certain sense is a more fantastic program. But they may feel a little bit left outside. I think a lot of maybe the best work on AGI is being done in private, labs. Um, and if I've listened to podcasts, and basically when they talk about AGI, what they're talking about is taking existing like large language models and just giving them more power so that they would be as capable as human beings. It's kind of like, if you put a suit on Frankenstein, and then Frankenstein could order at a restaurant, and Hank Frankenstein could vacuum the room or whatever. So that's what you'll see in my paper is that it turns out that consciousness actually is not that hard to model. It's actually, like a tiny little chip. And you can see that consciousness, this 8 cycle, probably looks like it comes up in the Krebs cycle, which is the metabolic metabolic cycle for, every single cell that's alive on the planet Earth. Octosulfur, is a template, has 8 sulfur atoms. Actually, sulfur has 16 atoms. So what it's kind of suggesting is that consciousness, because it's really just regulating the relationship between these two minds, which may be huge, but it itself is just steering. It's like the rudder of a ship. How big does a rudder have to be? It does not have to be very big, right? So it's the same chip, but if you don't have it, you don't have it. So what's happening with these zombie um, AI golems is that they're they're just mimicking human beings with their first mind, so to speak. They haven't been organically grown so that they would be kind of like um, self-attuned, self-aligned, as they'd be like basically like piles of sand. So you can make a pile of sand as a statue of a human being, and it can be very convincing, let's say, because if you have, but the wind will blow and it's just not going to hold up. So they don't have that, but it's not like an organism that has kind of built itself up with integrity. So these are like huge demonic monsters that can, you know, I guess demons are, what's a demon? A demon has all the rights of a human being, but none of the moral responsibilities. So, like a demon would be something that could power a windmill, let's say, like maybe electricity could be a demon, but well, like a demon would be like a corporation. So, like a corporation uh, uh, can, well, it can say whatever it wants. It can lie, let's say, and it doesn't have to be morally responsible, just legally responsible, right? So it has all the rights of a human being. It's a person, but it doesn't have any moral sensibility, right? It's just, just externally, whatever's externally imposed. So, so this is about what does it take to have an internal life, an internal selfhood? And what it seems is like fermions are built to have that. Now, bosons are godly, and so fermions are more humanly, let's say, because the spirit is able to have different meanings, in the same state. Let's say God and good, like it's the same spirit. It's just God is unconditional, good is conditional, but it's the same spirit, So where there's good, there's also God, right? It's a now where there's God, there may not be good, so because God is bigger than good. So that's why life is the fact that God is good. Eternal life is understanding God does not have to be good. Life is not fair, and so on. So that is maybe just to say there's a deeper layer, a bosonic layer, if you really want to have this theologically grounded. This is a layer above that. But you'll see what is it like to be a person, right? Or an individual or a conscious being, with these 3 levels of awareness. Why don't I just read this? But one of the reviews was very nice. They said, this isn't for everybody, but there's an audience out there that would really like to see this. It would be inspiring, and this is not an engineering work, but I think, they were very encouraging. So I'm looking for that audience. You're my audience. It's very hard to find that audience, but I think like this result has come so far. I mean, I've worked on this for 40 years. I've got so many things that I'd like to share with the world. I think the day will come, right? It's just, you can imagine all the obstacles. And the basic obstacles are like if you only tell part of the story, like if I try to write a paper about the 3 cycle, you see, it's like, well, that's not interesting, and then that's not real, and then that's not important, and blah, blah, blah. Right? Like, but if I write the story about the whole thing, how it fits together, well, maybe it's too much, or it's just too far out left field. So it's the greater part of genius to learn how to communicate this, navigate this. So the notion of the 3 minds, I think, is probably the key to communicating this. So This paper is written with the idea of those artificial general intelligence community in mind. These have been my preliminary remarks, and I'll continue in future videos going through the paper section by section. I'm just very happy, wondrously happy that you're my audience. Thank you. Thank you for watching this video. Please go to mathforwisdom.com or simply read the description to this video to learn how you can join our Math for Wisdom discussion group and our study groups. Thank you for liking this video, for subscribing to this YouTube channel, and for supporting Math for Wisdom through Patreon.
I'm a Patreon supporter for Math for Wisdom because Andrius and I have been friends for a long time, most of our lives. And the conversations I've had with him over the years have been very useful for me. And he's also a big fan, a supporter, of my work. And we have deep conversations about math and physics that have been useful for charting the course of my interests. And I'm grateful, and I want to support that. And our weekly or semi-weekly or bi-weekly conversations have been very important for me in the last couple of years, especially. So yeah, that's why I'm a supporter.